You spend over 30 years painstakingly building up your military forces.
Right.
You meticulously rewrite your entire naval doctrine from the ground up. You convert these massive commercial tankers into, heavily armed floating forward operating bases.
Yeah, a huge investment of time and resources.
Exactly. You prepare day and night for a very specific type of showdown on the water. And then in exactly 48 hours, it is all completely wiped off the map. Gone.
Just reduced to smoking steel in a harbor.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at a really staggering window of time where the United States effectively eradicated Iran's entire naval fleet.
It's truly a defining moment in modern military history.
Yeah.
I mean, we are looking at a massive, sudden shift in the balance of power across the Middle East.
Yeah.
And the sheer speed of this operation. That's what military analysts are going to be studying for decades.
For sure, because reading through the military briefs and the intelligence reports regarding what's being called Operation Epic Fury, the scale of this is just really hard to wrap your head around.
It really is.
So our mission for this deep dive today is to figure out exactly how a modernized, multi-decade naval doctrine was dismantled in just 2 days. We also want to look at, why the U.S. decided to unleash this specific level of overwhelming force right now.
And what it ultimately means for the global economy.
Exactly. Your gas prices, the supply chains we all rely on. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to really grasp the gravity of those 48 hours, we have to look at the catalyst.
Yeah.
Because this operation, it didn't happen in a vacuum.
Right. It wasn't unprovoked.
No, it was the climax of a very rapid chain reaction of escalations. It started with those initial American and Israeli strikes targeting key Iranian leadership.
Which led to the retaliation.
Exactly. In retaliation, Iran launched a series of attacks on several U.S. military bases in the region. But, this is key, the U.S. response to those base attacks broke the usual pattern.
The usual tit for tat.
Right. Instead of a proportional, one-for-one strike, the U.S. essentially bypassed the middleman. The response to the base attacks was the total systemic destruction of the Iranian Navy.
And the statistics coming out of those 2 days are absolutely shocking. You have a March 3rd quote from Donald Trump saying, they have no Navy, it's been knocked out.
Yeah.
And then you look at the official communications from U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM. They laid it out in plain text for the world to see. They stated that just 2 days prior, the Iranian regime had 11 ships operating in the Gulf of Oman.
And today?
Today, they have zero. Zero. They followed that up by declaring that Iran's days of harassing international shipping in that waterway are permanently over. So when CENTCOM says 11 ships went to zero, what exactly are we looking at here? Are these just like small patrol boats that got caught in the crossfire?
Not at all. The casualties list is staggering, and it includes the absolute crown jewels of their fleet. Going from 11 operational warships to zero in a 48-hour window is a logistical nightmare for any military.
I can't even imagine.
But satellite imagery from Planet Labs confirms the sheer scale of the devastation. The entire Bandar Abbas region, which is their main naval hub, it was bustling with warships just days prior, was completely blanketed in a smog of thick black smoke.
Wow. Let's talk about the specific ships that went down. The briefs highlight one called the Iris Makran, and the descriptions of this thing are wild.
It's massive.
Yeah, it started its life as a commercial oil tanker, right? But Iran converted it into a massive forward-based ship. Just how big are we talking?
To give you a sense of scale, the Makran displaced about 120,000 tons.
Okay.
To put that in perspective for you, that is significantly heavier than a U.S. Nimitz-class nuclear aircraft carrier.
No way.
Yes, it was one of the largest vessels in the entire Middle East. It was capable of acting as a mobile sea base and supporting widespread helicopter operations.
Yeah.
Now, satellite photos just show it sitting at its berth in Bandar Abbas, completely out of commission, with smoke pouring out of its central hull.
It sounds like a floating fortress. But it wasn't just these massive converted tankers, right? I mean, they lost traditional combat ships, too.
They did. They lost key assets like the Jamaran-class corvette.
Yeah.
A corvette is essentially a small, fast, highly maneuverable warship designed for escort and coastal defense.
And those are pretty heavily armed.
Extremely. They are central to their combat strategy because they're armed with anti-ship missiles, surface-to-air missiles, and torpedoes. One of these was stationed at a pier in Chabahar and was eventually found stuck and smoking at the Konarak Naval Base.
So reading the analysis, it seems the biggest prize, the loss that really seems to sting the most for them, is a ship called the Iris Shahid Bagheri.
Yes.
Analysts repeatedly refer to this vessel as a mothership.
The Bagheri was the absolute centerpiece of Iran's mobile drone threat. Like the Macron, it was a converted commercial ship, but it was heavily modified specifically to launch drones and retrieve helicopters. It was Iran's closest functional equivalent to an aircraft carrier. In fact, one military commentator wryly joked that it's the first aircraft carrier to be sunk since World War II.
That is a wild title to hold, though I imagine comparing a retrofitted commercial ship to a purpose-built nuclear-powered supercarrier like the USS Abraham Lincoln is a bit of an apples to oranges situation.
It is a stretch, definitely. But functionally, the loss of the Bagheri completely kneecaps Iran's strategy. And the damage extended far beyond the ships themselves. The physical naval headquarters in Bandar Abbas was essentially leveled.
Wow.
Furthermore, an admiral in Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard Corps, Ali Shamkhani, was killed in a coordinated Israeli airstrike. It is a total decapitation of their maritime power.
It sounds like a complete systemic collapse, but it makes me wonder, how does a military spend decades building a navy only to rely so heavily on retrofitted oil tankers? That seems like a glaring vulnerability.
That is the crucial question, and it highlights a fundamental fatal weakness in their military infrastructure. When weapons built specifically for high-end, explosive warfare are used against commercial ships that have simply been painted gray and given a flight deck.
The results are pretty much what you'd expect.
Predictably catastrophic, yes.
Yeah.
A commercial hull cannot withstand a precision military strike.
It's just wild to think they were caught so off guard by this level of destruction. Haven't they faced a similar wipeout against the U.S. Navy before?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, older Iranians, particularly those in the military brass, are likely feeling a massive, haunting sense of déjà vu right now.
Yeah.
Because they have been in this exact position before, watching helplessly as their fleet burned. It happened on April 18th, 1988, during Operation Praying Mantis.
Right. The history leading up to that 1988 conflict is intense. Throughout the late 70s and 80s, you had this boiling friction. The 1979 hostage crisis, the tragic 1983 suicide bombing in Beirut that killed 241 U.S. service members, the 1987 Iraqi jet attack on the USS Stark.
It was a powder keg.
It all boiled over into Operation Praying Mantis, where the U.S. military effectively destroyed half of Iran's navy in a matter of hours.
It was the most severe blow dealt to a Persian navy in over 2.5 millennia. But that 1988 defeat triggered a profound generational trauma within the Iranian military, which led to a complete paradigm shift in Tehran.
They realized they had to change their approach.
Exactly. They realized a very harsh reality. They could never, ever match the United States ship for ship or gun for gun in a conventional, symmetrical naval battle. The U.S. simply had too much money, too much steel, and too much firepower.
So instead of trying to build bigger ships to match the U.S., they pivoted heading into the 1990s. They completely rewrote their naval doctrine to focus on what analysts call an asymmetric swarm attack strategy.
Asymmetric warfare is essentially a classic guerrilla tactic applied to the ocean. You use cheap, fast, easily replaceable assets to overwhelm a smaller number of highly expensive, technologically advanced assets.
Quantity over quality.
Precisely. The Iranian plan was to use swarms of heavily armed fast attack boats, tiny midget submarines, and hidden land-based anti-ship missiles.
And the idea was to draw massive, multi-billion-dollar U.S. warships into constricted, narrow waters, specifically the Strait of Hormuz, and just overwhelm their defense systems with sheer numbers from multiple directions, like 100 hornets attacking a bear.
That is the perfect analogy. Iran spent decades refining this exact strategy, pouring their resources into these swarm tactics. They were meticulously preparing for a knife fight in a phone booth.
But the knife fight never happened.
Exactly.
And this is the grand irony of this entire 48-hour window. They prepared for decades for a very specific type of close-quarters combat, but the U.S. just never showed up to the arena.
The fatal flaw in the Iranian doctrine was that it relied entirely on the U.S. voluntarily sailing their large surface combatants into the constricted waters of the Persian Gulf to engage. But military technology and U.S. strategic thinking have advanced significantly since the 1990s.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the tactics used in Operation Epic Fury completely bypassed Iran's entire defensive posture. The U.S. didn't drive a single ship into the Strait of Hormuz to be swarmed by those fast boats.
Not one.
Instead, they kept their Arleigh Burke-class destroyers far out in the open ocean and utilized Tomahawk cruise missiles.
The standoff range of those Tomahawk missiles is the critical factor in this entire operation. We are talking about a striking distance of roughly 1,000 miles, or 1,600 kilometers.
It's incredible.
It meant the U.S. warships never even came close to visual range. They were completely outside the engagement range of Iran's fast attack boats, or coastal radar defenses.
So the Iranian warships were basically just idling in port, waiting for an enemy fleet to sail over the horizon. And instead, they were met with a horde of precision-guided missiles dropping out of the sky.
Exactly.
The military briefs described the Iranian ships as becoming pincushions, just soaking up these tomahawks in rapid succession. Their onboard defense systems were completely overwhelmed before the crews even knew what hit them.
And once the initial missile barrage disabled the ships and neutralized any anti-air defenses, the cleanup phase began. The U.S. sent in F-35 stealth fighters, dropping precision JDAM bombs.
Right.
For those unfamiliar, a JDAM is essentially a smart bomb kit strapped to a traditional unguided explosive. It gives a standard bomb terrifying pinpoint accuracy using GPS.
It's a stunning tactical subversion. But how did the U.S. know exactly where to strike? I mean, to hit 11 ships across multiple ports simultaneously requires an insane level of coordination.
The reason this was executed so flawlessly comes down to a concept called information dominance. By 2026, the U.S. military has achieved persistent, round-the-clock drone coverage and highly advanced satellite surveillance over the region.
They were watching everything.
Everything. They knew the exact GPS coordinates of every single Iranian vessel at all times. They didn't need to send scouting ships to hunt for them. They just needed to input the coordinates and fire.
They were destroyed before they could even slip their moorings and leave the dock. There's a brilliant summary from one of the analysts in the intelligence briefs. Iran brought a knife to a gunfight, and the U.S. refused to even enter the room.
What's fascinating here is that according to Middle East experts like Dr. Andreas Boone from the University of St. Gallen, this massive, fiery operation wasn't actually about the Iranian Navy itself.
Wait, you're telling me they leveled a naval headquarters and sank 11 ships, but the Navy wasn't the target?
Fundamentally, no. Dr. Boone points out that Iran's Navy, in conventional terms, was already severely outdated. It had been degraded by years of heavy international sanctions.
Right. They didn't have access to modern parts.
Exactly. Their Air Force is largely flying U.S.-built planes left over from the 1970s Shah era. When compared to the modern U.S. Armada, Dr. Boone described the Iranian military as a dwarf. They never posed a true kinetic threat, meaning an actual, physical, ship-to-ship explosive threat to the U.S. Navy in an open ocean fight.
So if the ships themselves weren't a direct threat to the U.S. fleet, what was the actual objective of Operation Epic Fury?
It was about the water those ships were threatening to control. The true target was securing the Strait of Hormuz.
Ah. And if you are listening to this and wondering how a naval battle on the other side of the planet affects your morning commute or your grocery bill, it all comes down to the Strait of Hormuz.
It really does.
It is arguably the single most vital economic choke point on the planet. Roughly 20% of all the crude oil used globally flows through that one narrow stretch of water. It is the lifeblood of the global energy market.
Yeah, absolutely.
To put that in perspective, China alone relies on that strait for nearly 46% of its oil.
The economic implications are massive. A disruption there directly impacts global supply chains, manufacturing costs, and the price you pay at the gas pump. Iran understood this perfectly.
Yeah, they knew their leverage.
They knew they couldn't defeat the U.S. military, but their asymmetric warfare doctrine gave them the power to threaten that specific economic choke point. The mere threat of their fast attack boats and anti-ship missiles was enough to send maritime insurance prices skyrocketing for any commercial vessel trying to pass through.
And the data shows that commercial transits through the strait had plummeted by 80% just from the threat alone. Ships were either refusing to go through entirely, taking massive detours, or trying to sneak through in the dead of night with their tracking transponders turned off.
And Iranian officials were leaning heavily into this leverage. Ibrahim Jabari, a senior advisor to the IRGC, publicly threatened that the strait was closed. He stated that the Revolutionary Guard would set ablaze any commercial ship that tried to pass. He even boasted that they would force the global price of oil to $200 a barrel.
$200 a barrel would be apocalyptic for the economy. It would instantly trigger a massive global recession. Inflation would skyrocket, the cost of shipping everyday goods would double, and people would feel it immediately.
Without a doubt.
So by wiping out the entire Iranian fleet in port, the U.S. didn't just win a military victory. They instantly stripped Iran of its only real geopolitical leverage. You cannot blockade a strait if you do not have any ships left to enforce the blockade.
It was a highly calculated strategic economic intervention masked as a naval bombardment. But as we know, a regime facing the total collapse of its primary strategic asset isn't going to just sit quietly and accept defeat.
No, they certainly did not. And that leads us to the aftermath and Iran's counterattack. The immediate response from Tehran was a frantic, massive propaganda push. They desperately tried to project power to their own citizens by claiming they had successfully struck the USS Abraham Lincoln with ballistic missiles,
Which the U.S. military very quickly and rather easily debunked by simply releasing current time-stamped photographs of the aircraft carrier operating completely normally. It was a transparent attempt to control the domestic narrative and prevent panic.
But beyond the propaganda, they did launch actual physical counterattacks. The briefs detail that Iran fired around 400 missiles and 1,000 drones, targeting various Gulf states like Qatar, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates.
They did launch a barrage, but context is crucial when looking at those numbers. While 400 missiles and 1,000 drones sounds like a massive, overwhelming attack, military analysts point out that this is actually a significantly smaller response than what Iran launched in the summer of 2025.
Really?
Yeah. During the aftermath of Operation Midnight Hammer, when the U.S. and Israel targeted Iranian nuclear infrastructure, the retaliation was much larger. The relatively diminished scale of this current counterattack suggests that their offensive capabilities and stockpiles have been severely degraded.
It really paints a picture of a dying gasp from a regime desperately trying to project strength while the foundation crumbles beneath them. But the danger is far from over. We are seeing major geopolitical ripple effects spreading out from this.
They are.
The conflict is escalating across the region through Iran's proxy network. The Houthis in Yemen, for example, are ramping up their attacks in solidarity. And U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio issued a very stark warning regarding the proxy groups, stating that the hardest hits are yet to come from the U.S. military.
The potential for regional escalation is incredibly high, and the situation remains volatile. But we also have to look beyond the Middle East to understand the full impact. The intelligence reports highlight a very interesting global consequence: the reaction in Moscow.
The domino effect reaches Vladimir Putin.
Yes, Russian President Vladimir Putin is reportedly watching this naval wipeout unfold with deep distress. Russia and Iran have forged a very close strategic alliance in recent years, largely out of mutual isolation from the West.
A partnership of necessity.
Exactly. If the Iranian regime collapses under the weight of this military and economic pressure, Russia loses one of its few remaining vital allies. More importantly, they lose a primary supplier of military hardware, like the very drones we were just talking about, which Russia heavily relies on.
That's a huge shift.
The sudden removal of Iran's naval capability doesn't just change the balance of power in the Persian Gulf, it radically shifts the geopolitical calculus for Eastern Europe and beyond.
It's incredible how a 48-hour operation on the coast of the Gulf of Oman can send strategic shockwaves all the way to the halls of the Kremlin. To summarize what we've unpacked today, in exactly 2 days, a modernized, multi-decade asymmetric naval doctrine was rendered utterly useless.
Overnight.
The U.S. utilized superior long-range, over-the-horizon technology to bypass Iran's coastal defenses entirely. In doing so, they fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Middle East and forcefully reopened the world's most vital economic artery for global oil supply.
It was a masterclass in subverting enemy expectations. The U.S. utilized overwhelming technological superiority, specifically information dominance and standoff munitions, to neutralize an asymmetric threat before that threat could even leave the harbor.
Before we wrap up, I do want to take a brief moment to remind you, the listener, that we are dealing with some incredibly heated political rhetoric right now, from figures on all sides of the global stage. Our goal with this deep dive isn't to take a side, endorse any specific political viewpoint, or weigh in on the rhetoric.
Right.
We are strictly here to map out the strategic realities on the ground and impartially report on the military analysis and facts provided in our sources.
This raises an important question.
I love it when you say that. Lay it on us.
If an entire modernized Navy that spent decades preparing asymmetric swarm tactics, pouring billions into defense, and converting massive commercial vessels into floating bases, can be completely eradicated in 48 hours without the enemy ships ever once coming into visual range, what does this mean for the future of naval warfare globally?
Yeah.
Are we entering an era where multi-billion-dollar surface warships, regardless of what flag they fly or how heavily armored they are destined to become obsolete, sitting ducks in the face of over-the-horizon precision missile strikes?
Wow, that is a heavy thought to leave on.
Yeah.
If you can be wiped out before you even leave port by an enemy you can't even see. It changes the whole concept of why a nation builds a traditional surface navy at all. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking deeper, and we will catch you on the next one.